You've heard about what happened to defeated warriors on Ottoman battlefields, but what about their wives? While men faced swift execution, women endured fates far more complex and terrifying. Their stories reveal a hidden world of power, fear, and survival that history often overlooks. Picture these women being taken from everything they knew, forced into a system designed to erase their past identities completely. Picture the smoke clearing from a conquered city, the fate of warriors sealed. But what became of the women left behind? While Ottoman chronicles documented the public executions of men as powerful spectacles, these same records fell silent about the systematic removal of women from the ruins. Their disappearance was not an afterthought, but a structured process, carefully managed away from public view. Women were not merely spoils of war to be randomly claimed. They became assets, catalogued, and transported like valuable goods in an organized operation. Islamic legal codes of the time provided clear guidelines for the treatment of captives, distinguishing their status from those slain in battle. This legal framework turned their capture into a bureaucratic exercise, stripping each woman of her name, her family, and her history long before she reached her final destination. The journey from their homes was a brutal procession into uncertainty. Many were forced to travel on foot, guarded closely, with no knowledge of where they were being taken or why. This practice was not random violence, but a calculated imperial policy designed to repopulate slave markets and supply households across the empire. Their capture served both economic and demographic purposes, reinforcing Ottoman power through controlled human redistribution. This initial seizure was just the first step in a process of deliberate erasure. Officials recorded their numbers, assessed their health, and assigned preliminary values based on age, appearance, and perceived usefulness. They ceased to be people and became inventory, their identities systematically dismantled through paperwork and procedure. The transformation from person to property began not at the market, but the moment they were taken. But arrival at the slave market was where their value would be assessed and their new lives assigned. Imagine standing on a platform while strangers study your teeth, check your muscle tone, and ask about skills you never wanted to use for them. The major slave markets, particularly in Constantinople, were not bustling, chaotic bazaars, but highly organized institutions that functioned with bureaucratic precision. Your past social standing meant nothing here, only the assessment happening before the crowd. Women endured physical inspections that assessed their health and appearance, with officials examining them like livestock. Their trauma became public entertainment, their skills in weaving or languages measured as economic value. The highest prices went to young women, who were often selected for the imperial harem or elite households, where appearance and youth held premium value. Buyers represented every tier of Ottoman society, from state officials needing domestic staff to military officers seeking servants for their posts, each with specific requirements and budgets. The auction block served as a stage for complete dehumanization, severing the last connections to their former identities. This was not the end of their ordeal, but a sorting mechanism that determined their future suffering. The market decided whether a woman would face years of domestic drudgery in a modest household, backbreaking agricultural labor on rural estates, or the complex psychological pressures of palace life. Each path offered different degrees of hardship, but all ensured the continued erasure of the person they once were. For a select few, the path led not to a simple household, but into the heart of Ottoman power itself. To understand the Sultan's palace, you must see it not as a home, but as an instrument of control. The imperial harem was a vast, secluded complex within Topkapi Palace, housing the Sultan's family and hundreds of female slaves. While often romanticized in Western imagination, it functioned as a highly disciplined institution, focused on producing heirs and maintaining dynastic power through systematic conditioning. New arrivals underwent forced conversion to Islam and rigorous education in Ottoman customs, language, and intricate palace etiquette. They learned to serve the dynasty not as individuals, but as interchangeable components of a political machine. Their existence became one of extreme privilege, juxtaposed with extreme confinement. They lived surrounded by luxury, but remained prisoners in a gilded cage, their movements restricted and their contacts limited to other women in the same circumstance. Social hierarchy within the harem was rigid and fiercely competitive, with status determined entirely by the sultan's favor and the crucial factor of bearing sons. The mother of a reigning sultan, known as the Valid Sultan, often held immense political power behind the scenes, a position reached only through ruthless intrigue and survival against constant rivals. This system was designed to assimilate captives completely, making them loyal instruments of the very state that had destroyed their original world. The greatest psychological violence was the forced adoption of a new identity that compelled victims to uphold the power structure that enslaved them. They became invested in the system's success, their survival depending on embracing the culture of their captors. This erasure of self went beyond physical confinement to mental reprogramming, where women measured their worth by their usefulness to the Ottoman dynasty rather than their stolen heritage. Yet for every woman who climbed the hierarchy within these palace walls, countless others faced a far more brutal existence outside in the everyday world of Ottoman society. But the palace was only for a chosen few. Most faced a reality of relentless unseen toil. The majority of captured women were sold into domestic or agricultural slavery across the empire's vast territories. Their labor became the invisible foundation of Ottoman economic and domestic life, their personal histories quietly erased by the crushing weight of daily routine. They worked as servants, scrubbing floors in elite households, as nannies raising their captors' children, as cooks preparing meals for families that were not their own, or they labored in fields and workshops under the sun with little rest or protection. Their children, born into slavery, were considered property of the owner from birth, perpetuating the cycle of servitude for generations, with no inherited connection to their mother's stolen heritage. Unlike the women selected for the harem, they had no path to power or influence, no potential for becoming favorites of the sultan or mothers of future rulers. Their existence was defined by silent obedience and hard work, without expectation of recognition or improvement. Legal manumission remained theoretically possible, but proved exceptionally rare in practice, often contingent upon the owner's personal discretion or granted only after decades of faithful service, when a woman's productive years had faded. This left most to work until their bodies broke down, their identities slowly dissolving into the background of Ottoman daily life. This mundane, exhausting servitude ensured the complete loss of their ancestral identity over time. The rhythm of daily tasks, the constant demand for labor, and the isolation from others who shared their background worked together to strip away cultural memory. They lived and died without leaving any trace of their original culture, language, or lineage, their stories absorbed into the anonymous mass of forced labor that sustained the empire. Their fate represented a form of social death, where a person continues breathing but ceases to exist as a cultural being connected to a past or future beyond servitude. And for some, the fate was even darker, traded away to serve a purpose beyond the empire's borders. What happened next to some women reveals how they were used as currency in a game of empires. High-value captives, particularly those from noble families or known for their beauty, were sometimes spared the slave market's public degradation. They were instead groomed to become diplomatic gifts, presented to allied rulers or powerful governors to secure loyalty and strengthen political alliances. This practice turned human beings into instruments of statecraft, living tributes to Ottoman dominance that could be offered and accepted like precious objects. These women received special training in etiquette, language, and court manners to make them suitable for presentation to foreign dignitaries. This created a network of obligation that reinforced social hierarchies among the elite across the region, binding recipients to the Ottoman state through personal connections. A woman might be sent hundreds of miles away to a foreign court, forever isolated from any hope of return to her homeland or contact with anyone who remembered her previous life. Her value lay in her symbolic weight as conquered people, a constant reminder of the giver's power and the recipient's subordinate status within the Ottoman sphere of influence. This fate offered material comfort and protection from hard labor, but ensured they remained political pawns forever defined by their captured status. They lived in luxury but under constant observation, their every movement reflecting on the diplomatic relationship they represented. The mini payoff reveals that as gifts, they were perpetual symbols of their own defeat, their presence a daily reinforcement of Ottoman hegemony wherever they were sent. Their very existence in a foreign court served as living proof of Ottoman power and the recipient's secondary status. Beyond the politics of gifts lay the raw, brutal economy of the military machine itself. Imagine the army on the move and the forgotten population that followed in its wake. Campaigns required massive logistical support, and captured women were often pressed into service for the military. They performed essential but grueling tasks like cooking, cleaning, and nursing wounded soldiers for the very army that destroyed their homes. Their labor became the invisible machinery that kept the Ottoman war machine advancing mile by mile. Life in the military camp was harsh and dangerous, with constant exposure to disease, malnutrition, and random violence from the troops they served. They worked from dawn until dark, preparing food, mending uniforms, and tending to injured men, all while facing the ever-present threat of sexual assault, with no legal protection or means of defense. Their labor freed Ottoman soldiers to focus on fighting, making these women unwilling participants in the further expansion of the empire that had enslaved them. Some were forced into temporary marriages with soldiers, a practice that provided comfort and domestic stability for the troops, but further bound the women to their captors through intimate connections. These arrangements offered minimal security in exchange for complete submission, creating psychological ties that complicated their captivity. They became part of the military community while remaining utterly powerless within it, their survival increasingly tied to the success of the very forces that had shattered their previous lives. This role made them essential cogs in the military apparatus, their well-being dependent on the victories of their oppressors. The mini payoff reveals that in the camp they experienced a unique form of torment, being forced to sustain the very force that had destroyed their families and homes. They cooked meals for men who might have killed their husbands, cleaned the quarters of officers who planned further conquests, and nursed soldiers back to health so they could continue subduing other communities like their own. Their stories, however, are not solely about victimhood, but also about the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The true cost of Ottoman conquest extended far beyond battlefield casualties. For generations, captured women were silently woven into the empire's social and economic fabric through systematic processes designed to erase their past identities completely. Their stories reveal how imperial power operated not just through visible violence, but through careful, bureaucratic absorption of human lives. This history challenges us to look beyond traditional military narratives to understand the full human price paid for empire building, a price disproportionately carried by women whose suffering became the invisible foundation of Ottoman society. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from.